Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense in our hip news segment during the pandemic. We've been locked out of doing a live show because our studio is closed down here, the Open Signal PDX studio in Portland, Oregon. We've been producing our television show at Open Signal a long time before it was ever called Open Signal. It's been known by several names over the years, everything from Portland Cable Access, Portland Community Media, but now it's Open Signal PDX. But they're closed because of the pandemic. So we're recording this in our office at 2712 Northeast Sandy Boulevard in Portland. Here in Portland, we've had a lot of controversy and mayhem here over the past few weeks. I just have to say that this show is about marijuana, but we stand in solidarity with all groups working for racial justice and all groups working against federal interference in our local political process. And with that, our first story tonight comes from the U.S. House of Representatives. It's set to vote in the coming days on an amendment to protect all state, territory, and tribal marijuana programs from Justice Department interference after a committee advanced the measure on Tuesday. The proposal, sponsored by Portland's own Representative Earl Blumenauer and California's Tom McClintock, the District of Columbia's Representative Eleanor Holmes, and Barbara Lee of California. It would prevent the Department of Justice from using its funds to impede the implementation of cannabis legalization laws. The House Rules Committee cleared the proposal for floor action, which is expected later this week. This would build on an existing, more limited provision to shield only state medical cannabis laws from Justice Department intervention that's been enacted through appropriations legislation each year since 2014. Last year was the first time the United States House of Representatives passed a more sweeping protection to cover state recreational marijuana laws, and the members approved it along largely bipartisan lines in a 267 to 165 vote. At the time, the tribal cannabis program language passed as a separate amendment, whereas this year, the tribal protections have been combined into a single proposal. The Senate did not follow suit, however, and the provisions did not make it into the final fiscal year 2020 spending legislation signed by President Trump. This latest amendment comes as there are plans in the works to hold a floor vote on a more sweeping standalone marijuana legalization bill in September, the Marijuana Opportunity, Reinvestment, and Expungement, or MORE Act, which was approved by the Judiciary Committee last year and would remove cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act and fund programs to begin repairing the harms of the war on drugs. Other cannabis-related measures have already been attached to this latest fiscal year 2021 appropriations legislation that the full chamber will vote on in the coming days. That includes the current medical cannabis protections as well as separate provisions allowing banks to service legal marijuana businesses without being penalized by the Treasury Department and protecting universities from losing funding for studying cannabis. Notably, the funding bill also excludes language to continue a long-standing policy that has blocked Washington, D.C. from spending its own money to legalize cannabis sales, so that block would be removed. Our own Congressman Blumenauer spoke in favor of Oregon's protections proposal prior to the committee vote. He stressed that marijuana is increasingly being legalized at the state level and lamented the racially disparate criminalization of cannabis. He said, quote, "More than 2/3 of Americans think we should end the failed federal policy of cannabis prohibition. We have a bill that would do just that, the MORE Act, which I hope will be on the House floor and address the huge problems of selective enforcement, which is applied against young black Americans disproportionately. We should stop wasting our resources pursuing a policy that's failed to keep cannabis out of the hands of children and discriminately imprisoning young people of color," end quote, Congressman Blumenauer said. The measure's approval by the Democratic-controlled panel comes one day after the Democratic National Committee's Platform Committee defeated an amendment to include support for legalizing cannabis in the Democratic Party's 2020 platform. Out of New Jersey, nearly 7 in 10 New Jersey voters said that they intend to decide in favor of a ballot measure to legalize the adult use of marijuana. 67% of the respondents, including majorities of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, backed the November 2020 measure, which amends the New Jersey Constitution to permit the possession, production, and retail sale of cannabis to those over the age of 21. That's an increase of 6 percentage points since voters were last posed the question in April. The ballot question reads, quote, do you approve amending the Constitution to legalize a controlled form of marijuana called cannabis? Only adults at least 21 years of age could use cannabis. The state commission created to oversee the state's medical cannabis program would also oversee the new personal use cannabis market. Cannabis products would be subject to the state sales tax. If authorized by the legislature, a municipality may pass a local ordinance to charge a local tax on cannabis products. End quote from the New Jersey ballot. Respondents expressed support for the measure because they believe that legalization will reduce the size of the black market, improve the economy, increase tax revenue, and result in production of better quality and safe cannabis products. Only 13% of New Jersey voters strongly oppose the initiative. Our next story is out of Missoula, Montana. Proponents of a statewide campaign to legalize the adult use cannabis market in Montana claim to have met the required necessary number of signatures to qualify for the November 2020 ballot. In a July 20 email update, proponents of New Approach Montana posted, quote, the campaign to legalize marijuana said Friday that it's cleared the signature hurdles to see its 2 initiatives on the ballot in Montana's general election, end quote. However, the Montana Secretary of State's office has not yet publicly verified the signature count. The office has until August 20th to do so. The 2 complementary ballot measures seek to legalize and regulate the personal use and commercial production and retail sale of marijuana to adults aged 21 or older. Adult use ballot initiatives have already qualified in New Jersey and South Dakota. And this other initiative is waiting certification in Arizona. Initiatives to legalize medical access to cannabis are certified for the ballot in Mississippi and South Dakota, while proponents of a medical initiative in Nebraska are awaiting certification. Our next story is from Arizona. More than 6 in 10 likely Arizona voters say they will vote in favor of the use of marijuana by adults and that it should be legal statewide. 62% of likely voters, quote, believe that marijuana should be legalized for adult use in the state of Arizona, end quote. The latest polling results are consistent with those reported in a separate firm in June, which found that 2/3 of voters favored legalizing marijuana and under this current law, which is named the Smart and Safe Arizona Act. On July 1st, proponents of the act filed over 420,000 signatures with the Secretary of State's office in Phoenix. That totals nearly twice the number of signatures from registered voters necessary to qualify for the November 2020 ballot. Those signatures are still in the process of being verified by state and local officials. The act permits those aged 21 or older to possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis and directs revenue from retail cannabis sales to fund various public education and safety programs. Adults would also be able to cultivate up to 6 plants for non-commercial purposes in a private residence. Those with marijuana convictions would be permitted to petition the courts to have their records expunged in Arizona. Across the nation, retail sales of cannabis products reached an all-time high during the month of April and May. Analyzing retail sales data for 24 state markets, the authors reported, quote, average consumer monthly spending rose to record highs in April and May, reaching $290 and $296 respectively, end quote. The authors highlighted record sales totals in several states. In Oregon, retail sales of cannabis products totaled an estimated $100 million in May, the single highest monthly reported in Oregon. In Colorado, marijuana-related sales in May totaled $192 million, also a record high. Sales of medical cannabis products in Florida and Oklahoma have also maintained month-over-month growth during the same time period. The authors concluded, quote, one unanticipated effect of the COVID-19 pandemic has been the growth acceleration of legal cannabis markets and erosion of the illicit markets in those states which have activated both medical and adult use sales, end quote. Numerous state and local regulators have designated marijuana-related dispensaries as essential businesses during the pandemic, allowing them to provide uninterrupted and in some cases expanded services during the pandemic. Our next story is out of Boston, Massachusetts. The percentage of chronic pain patients using cannabis therapeutically is rising, according to data published in the journal Advances in Therapy. Investigators affiliated with Harvard Medical School assessed trends in marijuana use among pain patients in a nationally representative sample during the years 2011 to 2015. The authors reported, quote, "Over the course of our study, we identified a significant and progressive increase in the number of patients using cannabis. In patients with chronic pain, cannabis use more than doubled during this period," end quote. The authors also reported that the average age of chronic pain patients who consume cannabis is 45, and that the majority of users are lower on the socioeconomic scale than were non-users. The authors concluded, quote, "This overall increase is not surprising given that several studies have shown cannabis to be effective in mitigating inflammation and demonstrated benefits to chronic pain symptoms with the use of cannabis, including improved pain, functional outcomes, and quality of life in patients with chronic pain syndromes. With chronic pain projected to increase over the next 2 decades to a rate of 1 in 3 people from the current rate of 1 in 5 people, our findings foretell that cannabis use could be projected to increase even more rapidly," end quote. Chronic pain is the most commonly reported qualifying condition among medical marijuana patients enrolled in state-specific access programs. A 2017 literature review by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine concluded, quote, "There is conclusive or substantial evidence that cannabis or cannabinoids are effective for the treatment of chronic pain in adults," end quote. Numerous studies report that pain patients enrolled in medical cannabis access programs typically reduce or eliminate their use of opioids over that time. This study, Cannabis Use in Hospitalized Patients with Chronic Pain, appears in this month's issue of Advances in Therapy. Our next story is right from across the river from us here in Portland, Oregon. It's from Vancouver, Washington, right across the Columbia River. Nearly 3 in 4 licensed healthcare professionals in Washington state endorse the use of medical cannabis as a substitute for opioids in patients with chronic pain, according to survey data published in the journal Cannabis and Cannabinoid Research. Researchers with the University of Washington School of Nursing surveyed a random sampling of actively licensed healthcare professionals legally permitted to provide medical cannabis authorizations in the state of Washington. 72% of the respondents agreed with the statement, quote, "Medical marijuana should be used to reduce the use of opioids for non-cancer pain," end quote. Several studies report that pain patients enrolled in state-sponsored cannabis access programs reduce or eliminate their use of opioid pain relievers over time. 63% of the respondents also agreed, quote, "DEA should reclassify marijuana so that it's no longer a Schedule I prohibited drug under federal law," end quote. A finding that's consistent with many other studies of health practitioners. Over 80% of the respondents expressed interest in receiving additional medical training with respect to cannabis, an opinion that's consistent with other studies as well. Among those who had never provided a medical cannabis authorization, more than half, 58%, reported that, quote, "they did not feel they had the knowledge," end quote, to do so. Respondents reported that they were likely to, quote, "rely most often on other healthcare professionals when seeking information about the use of medical cannabis." According to data published earlier this year in the journal Complementary Therapies in Medicine, most medical students report receiving no formal education about the therapeutic use of cannabis during their time as undergraduates. The survey's authors concluded, quote, "Patients expect their clinicians to provide information on the effects, risks, and benefits of cannabis. Healthcare professionals must be prepared to meet their expectations and to do so within the letter of the law. Now more than ever, a rational approach to medical cannabis is needed to assure the unforeseen consequences are mitigated while responsibly promoting the use of cannabis for medically appropriate symptoms and conditions," end quote. This study, Knowledge, Practices, and Attitudes of Washington Healthcare Professionals Regarding Medical Cannabis, appears in this month's issue of Cannabis and Cannabinoid Research. The next story is out of Washington, D.C. Nearly 1/3 of leisure travelers in the United States say they are interested in engaging in cannabis-related activities while on vacation, according to survey data compiled by MMGY Travel Intelligence. 29% of the respondents expressed interest in partaking in state-sanctioned cannabis-related activities, such as visiting a licensed marijuana dispensary or consuming a cannabis-infused edible product while on vacation. I always do. 38% of respondents said they are more interested in vacationing in a jurisdiction where cannabis is legal as compared to a destination where it is not. The survey's authors concluded, quote, "Cannabis tourism is an emerging travel segment with significant potential, especially for first-mover destinations," end quote. According to the data published in May in the Journal of Regional Analysis and Policy, the enactment of adult use legalization in Colorado and Washington is associated with increased tourism in both states. This report, Cannabis Tourism, Opportunities, Issues, and Strategies, is available online for download. Our next story is out of Boston, Massachusetts. The oral administration of cannabis-based products is associated with the improvements in autistic patients with self-injurious behaviors and comorbid epilepsy, according to data published in the journal Seminars in Pediatric Neurology. A pair of investigators affiliated with the Tufts University School of Medicine described their clinical experience working with children and young adults with autism spectrum disorder who had consumed either cannabis or hemp-based products. Among subjects with autism spectrum disorder associated aggression, 60% reported improvements following treatment. Among subjects diagnosed with autism spectrum and epilepsy, 91% reported some improvement in seizure control. The authors concluded, quote, "Based on our experience, cannabis-based products appear to hold promise for use in patients with autism spectrum disorder. The primary reasons for use in our patient population was treatment of aggression, including self-injurious behaviors, and epilepsy. Patients were not using these products for core symptoms of ASD, such as language and social development, so the response to therapy for core symptoms was not assessed in our patient population," end quote. Several small clinical trials have similarly reported that plant-derived cannabis extracts are effective and well tolerated in mitigating various symptoms in patients with autism spectrum disorder, including hyperactivity, seizures, anxiety, and rage attacks. The full text of this study, Autism Spectrum Disorder and Medical Cannabis, Review and Clinical Experience, appears in this month's edition of Seminars in Pediatric Neurology. Our last story tonight is about our initiatives here in Oregon. If Oregon voters approve a drug decriminalization measure this November, state officials say it will reduce racial disparities in the criminal justice system and save money that's currently spent on arrests and incarceration. IP 44, which officially qualified for the ballot last month, would remove criminal penalties for illicit drug possession and expand substance misuse treatment in Oregon. 3 state panels recently released draft analysis of the proposal. The Oregon Criminal Justice Commission published its draft report on the racial and ethnic impact of the measure this month. Members concluded it would reduce convictions for drug possession by about 91% statewide and also reduce racial disparities in arrests for illicit substances. Quote, "This means that approximately 1,800 fewer Oregonians per year are estimated to be convicted of felony possession of a controlled substance, and nearly 1,900 fewer convicted of misdemeanor possession of a controlled substance. Prior academic research suggests this drop in convictions will result in fewer collateral consequences stemming from criminal justice system involvement. Beyond the reductions described above, the changes proposed by IP 44 would also lead to a reduction in racial disparities for possession convictions, adding that statistical analysis indicates these disparities would be narrowed substantially if voters pass the measure. A separate measure to legalize psilocybin mushrooms for therapeutic purposes has also qualified for Oregon's November ballot. Of course, we advocate passing both of those initiatives. We don't have their ballot measure number yet. But anyway, that's the end of our Hemp News segment for this week. We have more archive videos available following through the top of the hour. We want to thank you for watching. Tune in next week and help restore hemp. Good night.
This is Mr. Henry Ford in 1941 with Popular Mechanics magazine showing off his car made from hemp.
Well, come climb the mountain with me. Come see what we can see. Come climb the mountain with me, and then we will all be free. Some men are born to lead, some men have destiny. Some men plant the seed, and some men set it free.
We had 92,000 cars a day, thousands of people parking behind the FBI building, and they arrested us and they said, you cannot do this. I said, well, I'm not going to pay you a fine and go on probation. So I did 15 days in prison rather than give them a $5 fine.
Wow, that's kind of like telling Jesus you can't practice on Sunday.
It was a fine line. So come climb the mountain with me. Come see what we can see. Come climb the mountain with me, and then we will all be free.
Jack here and Ed Adair.
Well, hi, guys.
They must be on the hemp tour. Are you on the hemp tour?
One man said we must hear. One man's voice was clear. One man heard the call. His vision speaks for all.
The number one plant for paper, fiber, and fuel from the natural cycle had been outlawed. That somehow the synthetic cycle had won, when the number one thing in the natural cycle could outproduce it and completely clean up the atmosphere. So my partner, Captain Ed, who had become my partner in 1973 and doing the politics of this, said we have to teach everybody in the world. So we went around and told everybody. But it was a slow process.
So come open your eyes with me and come see what you can see. It's time for the world to know the emperor wears no clothes. Come open your eyes with me. It's time for you to see. It's time for the world to know the emperor wears no clothes. It's time for the world to know the emperor wears no clothes. The emperor wears no clothes. The emperor wears no clothes. The emperor wears no clothes.
Been practicing law for 30 years, been protecting the rights of the marijuana smoker since that time. I ran in 1983 for Commissioner of Agriculture of Marijuana on a legal marijuana ticket. Let me tell you, in 1983, that didn't go over too damn hot. I said, Galbraith, how do you expect to win? I said, well, there's more marijuana smokers than there are Republicans in the state. If I can just get them to the polls, we can do that. Since ran in 91 and 95 for governor, ran in 99 as the Reform Party candidate for governor, spent $20,000 and got 15.3% of the vote as a third party. In Kentucky, that was pretty phenomenal. Ran as an independent for Congress in 2002, got 27% of the vote as an independent on a $20,000 budget. So I'm running this time as an independent for governor of the state of Kentucky. And let me tell you, I was mighty impressed to hear these words from Madeline, because she's got it exactly right. Marijuana is just a symptom of the issue. The real issue is, are we still sovereign human beings? That's what the American Revolution was all about. Marijuana is an iconic issue because it shows just how far the government has gone in overstepping its bounds in policing private behavior and impinging on the whole idea of what America itself was all about. Before America, we were all property. We belonged to the king or the queen or the warlord or whoever had the most gunpowder in the valley. And they said, hey, come in here, off with your head, there you went. There was nothing there. You had no rights. You were property. You belonged to whoever had the most gunpowder. But when our founding fathers decided that they were going to set this country up and wrote the Declaration of Independence, they recognized in essence that we were all created by our Creator and endowed with inalienable human rights. Among them, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. For the first time, they gave each of us our sovereignty. For this was the first time any ruling party had ever conceded that the individual was a sovereign thing. And they wrote the Constitution to try to instill the legal system to protect it. And since that time, it has been in great peril by people who seek to subvert it and make slaves of us to their will. And believe you me, the man ain't racist. He doesn't care what color his slaves are. And the whole idea of having piss in a cup to hold a job in America is anathema to what America itself was built on. I've been at this. I was 24 years old and a milkman in 1971 when I decided I was grist for the mill. I was going to end up in prison or dead at an early age because I didn't understand the system. And as long as I was ignorant of the system, I was going to be a pawn in their game. So I decided I had to learn the system. And the best way to do that was to go to college and become an attorney. And if I was going to do that and put in all that work, I might as well become governor of Kentucky and change the marijuana laws and try to lift Kentucky back into prosperity. We were the world's largest producer of cannabis for over 100 years. We called it hemp. You know, people said, what's the difference, Gatewood? And I said, well, you know, hemp and marijuana are both cannabis in the same way that Danny DeVito and Dennis Rodman are both adult males. You know. Yeah, but Kentucky was the world's largest producer, so we ought to return to it and let our farmers back into the niche of producing energy to solve our energy problems instead of giving all this marijuana, giving all this money over to the oil-producing countries. You know, we calculated that if you could plant 7% of the U.S. agricultural land in hemp, you wouldn't have to import another drop of oil. But, you know, what's happened is a great synthetic subversion where those people who make synthetic products have used the criminal law to criminalize farmers from producing competitive natural products in both petrochemicals and pharmaceuticals. And a great deal of our problems today could be directly associated to the people I refer to as the petrochemical, pharmaceutical, military, industrial, transnational, corporate, fascist, elite son of a bitches who have never said the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America or to the republic for which it stands. They're not warm and fuzzy about us or our children or grandchildren, and they see the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as impediments to the implementation of a new world order and a global economy. And that's just where it's at. And they, you know, they want to flatten the world to make us all, you know, a global economy and to erase national boundaries. But, you know, they can't afford to give every other human being on earth the same constitutional privileges and rights that we enjoy and recognition as sovereign human beings. So they're going to have to take ours away from us in order to make us a flat earth. I ain't going down without a fight. Yeah. Yeah. So in 1983, like I said, I started my political campaign. I started getting up every day in 1971, so I've been at it 40 years. And I've run for governor several times, so I have a pretty good idea about what politics is all about. I gave the keynote address at the Reform Party National Convention back in 2000, and you know, so I've been there. I've observed the politics, and after 40 years, I'd have to be pretty dumb not to have come up with at least one good idea in those 40 years. And I do tell the folks in this race right here, if I was ever going to lie to you, I would already have been elected, because you know. But descriptively speaking, Kentucky suffers from electile dysfunction. What's happened is that both parties have their horns locked up like two bull elk fighting over territory, while the business of the people lays dead in the dust. And neither party can produce a candidate can disengage from the partisanship long enough to work with the other side to get the job done. And my running mate, who's a beautiful lady with 6 kids, 2 of them adopted. One of her natural children has special needs, so she knows where the rubber meets the road in those women and children's issues. She and I are running totally as independents, no party affiliation whatsoever. We don't want one. We don't want all that baggage. We don't want all that corruption. We don't want it. We don't want you to keep it. That's just a monster to be fed once you get to the trough. You know, we're going to start returning any of the surpluses of the state back over to the people. But the first thing I'm going to do when I'm governor of the state of Kentucky, the minute I'm sworn into oath, is I'm going to have the commander of the National Guard land a helicopter in the front of the Capitol and bring me the keys to it. And that's the last time any one of those friggin' military helicopters is going to hover over the fields and gardens of the people of the state of Kentucky. This is America, not Afghanistan, and we're not an occupied territory, and we're not going to treat our citizens like we are one in the state of Kentucky. They got a pretty good idea that I mean it. I wrote an autobiography here not too long ago that I gave a copy to Madeline, and this is my autobiography. It's called The Last Free Man in America Meets the Synthetic Subversion, and that's me holding M60 on the front cover of it. And so they said, Galbraith, why are you holding that M60? I said, because I'm a serious man. You can get that, order one off of my website at gatewood.com. But we have a hell of a chance of winning in November. Our primary is this coming Tuesday. We're not in the primary. We're totally independent. And what interest you may have in how I do out there in that race is that we're going to take a giant leap. We're going to take a giant leap. We're going to go all the way to find out whether America still has a pulse or not. Yeah. And we're going to do it constitutionally. The United States Constitution does not provide you the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's in the Independence, Declaration of Independence. That's not law. So you don't officially have a right to that under federal law. But Kentucky has a constitution also, just like all the other states do. But it just so happens that Kentucky's constitution is the most pro-people constitution ever written. That our people back in 1890 got so tired of being raped by the railroad companies that they wrote a constitution that protected the people and kept corporations from running roughshod over everybody. And even now, that's beginning to fracture as our legislature keeps selling out to the folks that I call the petrochemical, pharmaceutical, military, industrial, transnational, corporate, fascist, elite son of a bitches. So what's going to happen is that the very first section of Kentucky's Constitution ensures that its citizens constitutionally are endowed with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the number one section in Kentucky Constitution, so I feel obliged to make it the number one basis of policy for my relationship of government to the people in the state of Kentucky. I'm going to get it off of their backs. I'm going to take it out of the bedrooms and the bloodstreams and the brains and the bladders and the billfolds and the back pockets and the internet bulletin boards and put them back in the little box where they belong. I'm going to make government not a burden on the people. I think it's the role of government to uplift, enlighten, educate, and endow people with an appreciation of life, appreciation of the social compact, their civil duties, their civil responsibilities, and make sure that we address them as sovereign human beings, capable of making their own decisions. And we're going to get medical marijuana in the hands of every sick and dying person in the state of Kentucky. No permit needed. I'm going to take it out of the hands of the 10 and 13 and 14-year-olds who are doing it just for kicks. We're going to give them over to the old age homes, to all the old folks in the old age homes. Hey, increase the appetite, put a smile on their face, and think about the increased visitation by the young folks. Hey, let's go see Dad. So if we can do this, if I can win this, it's going to be bigger than Ventura. It'll be next to Obama's election, because there was an independent elected governor of Rhode Island in this past one, the first one elected in 150 years, but he had been a state senator. He had been a federal U.S. senator from the state of Rhode Island, so he had that base Okay, but we'll be the first truly independent ticket ever to win governor in the state of Kentucky in the last 150 years. So we have I've got a website called gatewood.com. I'm a criminal defense attorney out of Lexington. I handle criminal cases, and I'd like to represent a lottery winner or two. If any of y'all know who you are out there, if you're a big dog and you're hanging out on millions, here's a good place to give me a fee and let me get on down the road on this campaign. If you can drop something, $5, $10, $20 in on gatewood.com, I appreciate you doing it. I'll send you a copy of my book. An ex-governor of the state of Kentucky said it was the best statement of freedom in America that he'd ever read. On the same day, an 18-year-old girl from the middle of the mountains called me, said she had read it twice previous week, and it was the #1 seller at Joseph Beth's, top independent bookstore in America, for 11 weeks. So I left out 100% of the sex and 80% of the drugs, but it's still a kick-ass read. Folks, I'm out here at the bequest of and the generosity of somebody that I'd certainly like to give a shout out to, and that's Mr. Paul Stanford here in Oregon. He was swell enough to let me appear on his program last night, and we're going to throw a little fundraiser over at the Clinton Street Theater. What time? At 3:30. So, to 5:30. So, I understand you all got some business to conduct at the meeting, and I hope I didn't take up too much of your time. Gatewood Galbraith, I appreciate you all's time and attention. Thank you so much.
Well, what's going on right now is that a person who wants to use medical marijuana, in other words, has a disease process, which includes wasting disease of AIDS, multiple sclerosis, glaucoma, and some people even use it for various and sundry types of pain problems. And there is virtually, in particular in regard to pain, pain is so subjective that there's no way for somebody to measure the degree of pain or the intensity of pain or even the relief of pain or anything else. There's just no way to do this. But if a person says, I have a bad back, or I have a bad this or a bad that, and I'm in pain, and that smoking marijuana helps, I don't think that anybody should deny them the right to use that. Now, what's going on in Oregon at the present time is that people who are using marijuana for medical purposes have to get some sort of a letter from a physician which says marijuana will alleviate the problem, pain, or whatever it might be for this individual. This letter is sent to the Oregon Health Division. Dr. Grant Higginson is the person who is the, I guess, he's not the director of the Oregon Health Division, but he's the #2 person there. And the #1 person is not a physician, but he is. So he is the one to whom these letters are addressed, and he is the one who will issue the equivalent of a marijuana user's license. Mm-hmm. Now, the strange thing about it is that it is still a federal offense to, in many respects, about the use of marijuana. So at the present time, nobody knows what's going to happen, but this hasn't prevented people who get benefit from the use of marijuana from using it. There are an estimated 100,000 people in the United States right now who admit to using it for medical purposes, and there are probably, as I understand it, around 10 million people, excuse me, who use marijuana recreationally. Now, this is, I think the so-called recreational use of this is a kind of a poor term, because I don't think people smoke tobacco for recreational purposes. I don't know why people smoke tobacco, but whether it's for recreational purposes or whatever it is, this is a sort of a strange terminology that is used. So
It's like when they use alcohol, that's social drinking or something, right?
well, I suppose that's true. I've never heard of the social. Well,
Recreational use of alcohol.
yeah, recreational use of alcohol and the social use of marijuana. So the terminology here is very, very obscure or muddied or whatever the right word is.
Imprecise at the least.
Absolutely. Now, I think one of the strangest things about this is that the federal government raises marijuana in Mississippi. The federal government has it harvested and processed to make marijuana cigarettes. And there are 8 people in the United States who have letters of permission from the Drug Enforcement Administration to use marijuana for their medical purposes. Now, if 8 people can use it for medical purposes, for relief of their medical problem, why can't 9 or 10 or 1,000 use it? So it's a very, very strange situation. And a year and a half ago, I was one of 6 doctors who testified at the American Medical Association convention for the American Medical Association to stand behind the rights of patients to use marijuana for medical purposes. And this was passed by the House of Delegates of the American Medical Association in Dallas. The headquarters of the American Medical Association has, I don't know whether the word is they've sat on their hands or sat on their heads or whatever they've done, but they haven't done anything about it. And we 6 doctors have written a letter to the Journal of the American Medical Association as the equivalent of a letter to the editor asking why hasn't the American Medical Association taken a stand on this? Well, the first letter we wrote, they sent back that we're sorry, but we're rejecting it because we have too many other things to print in the magazine or something like that. And then about 6 weeks ago, the American, what is it, the Institute of Medicine?
Institute of Medicine.
The Institute of
National
Medicine
Academy of Science.
From the National Academy of Science came out, very highly publicized throughout the United States, that there was considerable evidence that marijuana was good for certain medical problems. And the American Medical Association has been strangely quiet about this, but in view of the Institute of Medicine, we 6 doctors again wrote a letter to the American Medical Association and the Journal of the American Medical Association say, the Institute of Medicine says that it has some benefit in medical purposes, and why should people who use it be thrown in jail for using it for medical reasons? So, as somebody pointed out a few minutes ago, we are at the cutting edge of this, and with the vote, I guess the last 2 elections we had for use of medical marijuana.
Yeah, November of '98 here in Oregon.
Yep.
And Washington and
Arizona.
They voted on it for
California.
the second time.
Yeah.
They originally voted in 1996, along with California, to legalize medical marijuana.
And I think if I understand right, there are 6 states who have passed initiatives. Is that what it is? Or
Yes, 6, and then that's not counting the District of Columbia, where the United States federal Congress has not allowed that vote to be counted. Exit polls showed that it passed with 72%, but an amendment to an appropriations rider by Georgia Representative Bob Barr defunded the counting of that vote and said that the District of Columbia cannot count the vote on medical marijuana that was on their ballot.
Well, so Dr. Beck, I mean, Floyd Estate, is there every day, we find out new information about drugs that have existed for a long time? I mean, it's not like the book is closed, once they come out with the drug in the first place.
Well, I think it's very interesting that we know from historical records that cannabis has been used for literally thousands of years, and nobody has ever reported any bad effects from the use of it.
Yeah.
And when you compare that to tobacco or to alcohol, there's absolutely no comparison between tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana. There's just absolutely none whatsoever. And the statement that marijuana is a gateway drug to heroin or cocaine or whatever, this was verbally thrashed by the Institute of Medicine that said there was no evidence whatsoever that this was the case. So I think the main thing that we're doing is supporting General McCafferty and a whole bunch of DEA agents who are making very high salaries and don't want to give up the game, as you might say. So the people that are making money on the marijuana issue are the DEA agents and the people who grow and sell marijuana and don't pay any taxes on any aspect of the money that they make. And if they're caught, they get sent to a federal prison where it costs at least $40,000 a year to keep them in prison. So I guess the federal prisons, the guards in the prisons are probably also recipients of a lot of money from the marijuana business. So
exactly.
It's really a strange, absolutely bizarre situation that this has gone on, and I can't understand why some of these politicians in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere can't see this or understand it or whatever the right word is. I don't understand it.
But the bills are dormant because the federal government made it so difficult and horrendous for the doctors to use it.
What I understand too of people who have glaucoma and are applying for
Right.
The hemp for their medical
Absolutely.
purposes. From what I understand, the paperwork takes anywhere from a year to 2 years.
Yeah, it's horrendous. And the Mars project is attempting to, they have cut it down until a doctor can do it in about 15 minutes.
Now, from what I understand, you also testified before the DEA in 1988.
I did indeed.
And now, what came from that, and who did you speak with when you were
Oh, I testified in front of a Judge Francis Young, very intelligent man. And the feeling of the people that I was working with, normal, and he was going to brush it off.
Okay.
We were going to finish our testimony, and 15 minutes later he was going to say, forget it. He didn't do that. He agonized over this for a long time. And he was only to make a recommendation to the head of DEA. He couldn't make the decision. And he recommended wholeheartedly. And he had heard people all over the United States from all different kinds of illnesses and said, in effect, for God's sakes, help these people.
And what kind of response did he receive?
The head of DEA, in effect, said drop dead.
Why do you think that is?
Because they're stupid.
Okay. Now, we only have a couple of minutes left, and I was wondering, you commented that people of an older generation than what I am have a problem at times being able to restructure their thinking on this plant. What do you have to say to them? Okay,
We were told, and I came from an era that if my government told me, go out and stand in the middle of the traffic, I'd probably do it because they would never tell me anything that was harmful. And it has taken me a long time to realize this is no longer true. Maybe it never was, but I thought it was. And so therefore, it's difficult. It's like a religion. You may go away from the religion that you were brought up as a child, but it's always there. And I'm not sure that I would ever be able to smoke a marijuana cigarette.
Okay, now you've talked about Mars, and there's probably a variety of people who are watching this show who'd like to have the chance to find out more about your organization or the organization Mars.
It's
Address and phone number,
I
please.
don't have it. It's
All right.
through ACT, Alliance for Cannabis Therapeutics, and they're based here in Washington, D.C. I do not have an address or a telephone number, but I'm sure that through normal, High Times has an ad in it. There are many places that they can contact them.
Any final comment to our audience?
Oh, go with your gut feeling. If you think you're right, go for it.
Thank you very much. It has really been a unique learning experience having May on our show. And I hope that the information that she brought forth is something that you can digest and share with people around you and you grow from. There are a lot of people out there who are suffering medically and need the benefits of the medicines that are derive from the hemp plant. We encourage you to write your congressmen, we encourage you to write your senators, and we encourage you to become more vocal in your community to bring this message forward. Thank you very much for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you very much, May. I'd like to have you back on the show.
Thank you. I'd love to come back.
I'll start with where I represent. I represent South Jackson County, everything from the Green Springs through Ashland, Talent, Phoenix, into Jacksonville, and into the Applegate Valley. I'm the House Democratic co-chair of the Ways and Means Committee, which is the budget committee in the state. And I have favored legalization for many years. I think prohibition has not worked. We've had decades of evidence that says prohibition does not work, and it's counterproductive. But what really spurs me on now is having spent the last 3 or 4 years on the budget committee, signing my names to budgets that cut education for our kids, that cut health care for seniors, that make our communities less safe by cutting back public safety programs. I can't in good conscience continue to do that work of trying to rebalance the state budget through cuts when I know there is a source of revenue that is reasonable, that is rational, it's the right policy choice, and it's the right economic choice for our state, and that's the legalization of marijuana and the legalization of industrial hemp. And I'm not sure if all of you followed this, but in 2009, the legislature passed a bill confirming that the state of Oregon's policy is to have legalized industrial hemp in our state. The federal government still says we cannot grow it. But we've passed legislation on industrial hemp that as soon as the federal government comes to a rational decision on that and allows the production of industrial hemp, our state will be ready to move into production of industrial hemp. And that proposal, just so you know, passed almost unanimously, Republican and Democratic, urban and rural. In fact, the representatives and the senators from Eastern Oregon were some of the most enthusiastic backers of having industrial hemp as a crop for our state because it just makes sense. It makes economic sense for jobs in their community. It makes economic sense for the state. So we will get there on industrial hemp, and we are going to get there on legalization. I can liken this to the effort through the initiative system of when women got the right to vote. Oregon was the first state to put that on the ballot and have it passed by our people. It took 3 times to get on the ballot, 3 times on the ballot to finally pass and become the law of the state of Oregon. This effort has been building, and we have people here who have worked on it for many, many years, has been building for many years. We're at a point now where we're making a major leap forward by having this on the ballot for the voters of Oregon to give their view on. They will render their verdict next Tuesday. We'll know what it is. And if it passes, which I sincerely hope it does, we'll work with it to make it work. We'll keep putting pressure on the feds to make sure that becomes the law for the state of Oregon and hopefully influence the rest of the country. It's on the ballot in Washington. It's on the ballot in Colorado as well. We will watch how those elections turn out as well, and we'll build off what happens here on Tuesday no matter what. But I just wanted to be here today to again express my strong support for legalization, my strong support for industrial hemp as well, my strong support for ending prohibition, having rational drug policies in the state of Oregon and the United States of America to move in a totally different direction. And the last issue I'll touch on is the one that Lori, I think, called the press conference here today to emphasize as well, is expansion of the medical marijuana program to include post-traumatic stress. And that to me is a reasonable and, again, totally vital step for the state to take. We have people in the state right now. Oregon can and should be a leader in the research of how marijuana impacts ailments across the board. We have the growers here, we have the medical community here, and we obviously have the people in need here. We should put that together, put the people who are suffering ailments together, the people doing research on marijuana and the growers, and come up with the data so we can say with great confidence that someone who is suffering from PTSD with this strain of marijuana or that strain of marijuana can expect certain results. Someone with chronic pain with this strain of marijuana or that strain of marijuana used in this way can expect this results. The medical marijuana program, in my view, needs to be professionalized, and we need to make sure that it's having the best possible outcomes for the patients who are on it. And with that, I will just turn it over to you.
My other organization is VOTE, Victory Over the Enemy.
Hey, I like that.
Which is the unregistered voter in the state of California.
Oh, okay.
What we have to do is upgrade our standard of voting. We can send people to the moon, and we're sending satellites into outer space. I believe that our system of voting in this country is very antiquated, very old. It needs to be renewed and revised and updated. I think that the voting should be more important than Christmas.
Okay.
I think that we should spend a lot of money on educating the people. Look at it this way. The government is in favor of the United States public to vote. I feel that it's our duty to show them or to find a way to help the government find ways to help people vote. And I think with television, the telephone, computer optics, and satellite dishes and all this technology that we've got, we should be able to sit home and vote on all these important issues. And I'm sure the government wants everybody to vote. It's our constitutional right, and they stand behind it. I think that they should get behind us and help us to get out there and make voting a very important issue. It is important, even if you're not in favor of, say, the California Marijuana Initiative or the Hemp Initiative, that's fine. We would love for you to come out and speak your opinion. We want you out there voting. We want you to take an active part in this country. If you do, then I think this will solve the problem.
I want to thank you guys for watching. We're going to go out on another great song by Mr. John Coronet. We'll be back next week and help us restore hemp.
Yeah, restore hemp.
Another chapter as we turn the page. We exist within a Ukraine. I know that freedom's heard around the globe. Just where our future lies will nobody know. Oh, let's make the best of it now. 'Cause you never know when the sky will fall. Maybe the moon will reach the earth one day. We're not the same race that we used to be. Can't you see? Now the next time that